When was the last time you looked at your own life and asked yourself honestly, with no excuses and no hiding, whether you are truly living or just passing time? When was the last time you felt that fire inside you, that hunger, that deep and uncomfortable feeling that you were born for something greater than what you are doing right now? If you cannot answer that question, then this story is exactly what you need. And you need to hear it all the way to the end. Because what you are about to learn is not just the story of a famous man. It is a mirror. And when you look into it, you will see yourself. Welcome to English to Inspire, the place where every story we tell has two purposes: to help you grow in the English language and to push you to grow as a human being. Because we believe that learning a new language is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It is about opening a new door inside your mind. A door that leads to a bigger version of who you are. And every single word you understand today is one step closer to that version. So listen carefully. Absorb every sentence, and let the language and the message work together inside you at the same time. If this kind of content speaks to your soul, if you feel that this channel is something different, something real, then do one simple thing right now and subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories that are designed to change the way you think and the way you speak. And you do not want to miss a single one of them. Today we are going to talk about a man who lost almost everything that a human being can lose. A man who had no stable home as a child, no father to guide him, no easy road waiting for him. A man who watched the people he loved most disappear from this world one by one. And yet, he never became bitter. He never became cold. He never stopped moving forward. And the world knows his name today. Not because life was easy for him, but because he refused to let the pain be the end of his story. That man is Keanu Reeves. You might think you know him. You have seen his face on the screen. You have watched him fight in slow motion. You have heard people call him one of the kindest men in Hollywood. But today, we are going to go much deeper than the movies and the fame. We are going to go into the wounds, into the silence, into the years when nobody was watching and he was fighting his battles alone. Because that is where the real lesson lives. Not in the success, but in everything he survived before the success arrived. And if you are going through something difficult right now, if you feel lost, or tired, or invisible, then Keanu Reeves has something to say to you. Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September the 2nd, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. And from the very first years of his life, the world made it clear that nothing was going to be given to him easily, because his father, Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., was a man who could not stay, a man who chose the road over his family, and who disappeared from Keanu's life when the boy was only 3 years old, leaving behind a wound that does not heal quickly, a wound that a small child carries in silence, because he does not even have the words to describe what is missing. He only knows that something is gone, and that something was supposed to be there. His mother, Patricia, was a strong and resilient woman who worked as a costume designer and performer, and she did everything she could to build a life for her children. But that life was never still. It was always moving, always changing. Because Patricia moved the family from Beirut to Sydney, then to New York, then to Toronto. And each move meant a new school, new faces, new rules, new ways of trying to belong somewhere. And for a boy who was already carrying the absence of his father like a stone in his chest, this constant movement made it even harder to find solid ground beneath his feet, to feel that he had a place in this world that was truly his own. In school, Keanu struggled in ways that the system did not know how to handle with patience or understanding, because he had dyslexia, a condition that made reading and processing written information genuinely difficult. And in classrooms that were designed for one type of mind, his type of mind was treated like a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be developed. So he moved through several schools, never quite fitting in, never quite finding the place where someone looked at him and said, "You belong here and we see what you are capable of." And that kind of invisibility, that feeling of being different, without knowing if different is something to be proud of or ashamed of, shapes a young person in ways that last for decades. What saved Keanu in those years was not a classroom, and it was not a textbook. It was movement. It was physicality. It was the ice, because he became deeply passionate about ice hockey and played as a goalkeeper with real dedication and real skill. And there is something deeply important in that choice, because a goalkeeper is the last line of defense, the one who stands alone facing the most pressure, the one who cannot hide when everything depends on him, and perhaps even then, without knowing it consciously. Keanu was training himself for the kind of life that was coming, a life that would demand he stand alone in difficult moments and not fall apart. He also discovered acting, and when he did, something shifted inside him, because for a young man who had always felt out of place, the stage and the camera offered something extraordinary. They offered a space where being different was not a weakness, but a power, where the intensity he carried inside him had somewhere to go, where his quiet and unusual presence was not something to be fixed, but something to be used. And so he made a decision that many people around him did not take seriously. He decided that he was going to become an actor, not because it was safe, not because it was guaranteed, but because it was the only thing that made him feel completely alive. There are certain kinds of pain that words struggle to contain, certain losses that go so deep inside a person that they change the very structure of who that person is. And Keanu Reeves knows this kind of pain better than most people on this earth, because life did not simply challenge him once or twice and then leave him alone. Life came back again and again with its heaviest blows, as if testing whether this man had the strength to remain standing. And what is extraordinary and what you need to understand completely is that he did remain standing, not because he was made of stone, but because he made a choice every single morning to keep going, even when keeping going felt impossible. The first devastating blow came in the form of a friendship, because Keanu and River Phoenix were close in the way that only young men chasing the same dream in the same dangerous city can be close. They understood each other. They moved in the same world. They shared that particular hunger that comes with being young and ambitious and slightly outside of everything. And then on the 31st of October, 1993, River Phoenix collapsed outside a nightclub in Los Angeles and never got up again. He was 23 years old, and Keanu lost not just a friend, but a mirror, someone who had reflected back to him a version of himself that he recognized and trusted. And that kind of loss leaves a silence that never completely fills. But life was not finished, because in the year 1999, Keanu and his girlfriend Jennifer Seam were expecting a child, a daughter they had already named Ava Archer Syme Reeves, and she was born stillborn 8 months into the pregnancy. And if you have never experienced that specific kind of grief, then you cannot fully measure its weight, because it is the loss of a future, the loss of a person who existed in your heart and your plans and your dreams long before she existed in the world. And Keanu and Jennifer buried their daughter together, and then watched as that shared grief slowly pulled them apart instead of bringing them closer. Because grief does not always unite people. Sometimes it isolates them inside their own private darkness. The relationship ended, and Jennifer Syme struggled deeply in the months that followed. And then in April of 2001, she died in a car accident in Los Angeles. And Keanu was once again standing at a grave, once again holding a loss that had no reasonable explanation, once again being asked by life to find a reason to continue, when continuing felt like the cruelest joke imaginable. And here's where most people would have broken completely. Here's where most people would have turned to something destructive or simply disappeared from the world. And nobody would have blamed him. Because 3 devastating losses in less than a decade is not something any human being is designed to carry, and yet he carried it. And here's what you need to ask yourself right now, because this is not just Keanu's story anymore. This is your story too. Think about the weight you are carrying today. Think about the loss, or the disappointment, or the fear that you are using as a reason to stay still, to stay small, to stay silent. And then think about this man who buried a daughter and a girlfriend and a best friend and still walked onto a film set, still showed up, still chose life over surrender. Because if he could carry that and keep moving, then the question you need to answer honestly is, what exactly is your excuse for stopping? There is a story that the world loves to tell about successful people, and it is a clean and comfortable story It goes like this. The person had a dream. They worked hard. They faced a few obstacles. And then one day the door opened and everything changed. And people love this story because it is simple and it does not ask too much of them. But the real story, the one that actually teaches you something useful, is almost never that clean. It is almost never that comfortable. And Keanu Reeves is living proof that the real story is longer and harder and lonelier than anything a 2-minute highlight reel will ever show you. Because before the world knew his name, there were years of doubt and rejection and silence that he had to walk through completely alone. When Keanu decided to pursue acting seriously, he was a young man in Toronto with no powerful connections, no famous family name, no clear path forward, just a feeling in his chest that this was the direction he needed to move in. And feelings alone do not open doors in the entertainment industry. So he started from the bottom, doing small television roles, doing theater, doing anything that would put him in front of a camera or an audience, because he understood something that many people never learn, which is that waiting for the perfect opportunity is just another name for fear, and that the only way to get better and to get noticed is to show up and do the work, even when the work feels small and unglamorous and far from the dream you are carrying inside you. He moved to Los Angeles because that is where the dream required him to be. And Los Angeles is a city that chews up young people with big dreams and spits them out every single day. It is a city of endless auditions and closed doors and conversations that lead nowhere. And Keanu faced his share of all of that. He was told that his acting style was too unusual, that his presence was too quiet, that he did not fit the mold that Hollywood had already decided was the correct shape for a leading man. And every one of those rejections was an invitation to quit, a reasonable and socially acceptable exit from a path that was not showing any signs of getting easier. And he refused every single one of those invitations. What kept him going was not arrogance, and it was not blind optimism. It was something quieter and more durable than either of those things. It was a deep and stubborn commitment to the craft itself. Because Keanu genuinely loved acting. He loved the process of disappearing into a character. He loved the discipline of preparing for a role. He loved the strange and sacred space that opens up between an actor and the truth of a human experience. And when you love the work itself, rather than just the rewards the work might bring, you develop a kind of resilience that cannot be manufactured or faked, because the work itself becomes the reason to continue and not just a means to an end. And this is the lesson that is sitting right in front of you right now. And you need to look at it directly without turning away. Because how many times have you stopped doing something you genuinely loved because the results were not coming fast enough? How many times have you let the silence of the world convince you that your effort was worthless? How many times have you chosen the comfortable exit over the difficult continuation? Keanu Reeves did not become who he is because the road was easy. He became who he is because he decided that the love of the work was worth more than the comfort of giving up. And that decision is available to you right now, today, in whatever it is you are building or trying or fighting for. There is a moment in every fighter's journey where the first real sign appears. Not the final victory, not the big explosion of success, but the first small light that proves the direction is correct. The first evidence that the sacrifice and the stubbornness and the long quiet years of showing up were not wasted. And for Keanu Reeves, that first light came gradually and then suddenly, the way most important things in life actually arrive. Not with a grand announcement, but with a slow accumulation of effort that one day reaches a tipping point and changes everything. And understanding how that accumulation works is one of the most important lessons you will ever learn about building something real in your own life. His early career was a collection of small steps taken with full commitment. Television, movies, supporting roles, projects that most people today have never heard of. And in 1989, he appeared in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a comedy that was light and fun and completely different from the intense and serious image the world would later associate with him. And here is something worth thinking about deeply, because Keanu did not refuse that role. because it was not serious enough or prestigious enough. He took it. He committed to it fully. He made it work, and it opened a door. And that is a lesson about pride and practicality that many talented people never learn because they are too busy waiting for the role that feels worthy of their self-image. The momentum continued to build, because after Bill and Ted came more roles, more experience, more understanding of how to carry a film and connect with an audience. And then, in 1994, came Speed, the action thriller that put Keanu Reeves in front of a global audience in a completely different way. And suddenly the world saw something in him that Hollywood had been slow to recognize. They saw a physical presence and a calm intensity that worked perfectly in high-stakes situations. They saw a man who could hold the screen without needing to fill every moment with noise and performance. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply be still and let their presence speak for itself. But what the public saw on screen was built on something the cameras never captured, which was the extraordinary level of physical and mental preparation that Keanu brought to every single role. Because he was never the actor who showed up and improvised his way through a performance. He was the actor who trained for months, who studied the character from the inside out, who pushed his body to its limits and then pushed further. And this commitment to preparation is what separated him from people with equal or greater natural talent. Because talent without discipline is just potential. And potential that is never developed is just a beautiful and useless dream sitting in a drawer collecting dust. So look at where you are right now and think about the small steps that are available to you today. Not the giant leap, not the perfect moment, not the opportunity that will finally make everything easy, but the small and unglamorous step that is sitting right in front of you waiting to be taken. Because Keanu Reeves did not jump from a struggling young actor in Toronto to a global icon in one movement. He walked there one committed step at a time, and every step taught him something. And every role prepared him for the next one. And the climb was slow, and the climb was real, and the climb was worth every single difficult moment. And your climb is waiting for you to begin. There are moments in history that divide time into before and after. Moments so large and so unexpected that they reshape the entire landscape of what is possible. And in 1999, a film arrived that did exactly that. Not just for Keanu Reeves, but for cinema itself. And for the way human beings thought about reality and choice and the nature of the world they were living in. And that film was The Matrix. And if you have never seen it, then you need to understand that it was not simply an action movie. It was a philosophical earthquake, dressed in black leather and slow motion. And at the center of it stood a quiet man from Toronto, who had spent years being told he did not fit the mold. And it turned out the mold was wrong and he was right all along. The role of Neo was not handed to Keanu Reeves without a fight, because the studio had doubts. Because Hollywood always has doubts about the people who do not look and sound exactly like what success is supposed to look and sound like. But the directors, the Wachowskis, believed in him. And Keanu believed in the project with a depth that went far beyond professional obligation. Because he trained for months with a physical and mental intensity that transformed his body and his mind. He studied martial arts and wire work and the philosophical ideas embedded in the script. He did not just prepare to play Neo, he prepared to become Neo. And that level of commitment is not something you can fake, and it is not something that goes unnoticed on screen. When The Matrix was released, it became a global phenomenon. Almost immediately, audiences around the world felt something shift inside them when they watched it. Because the story it was telling was not really about machines and simulations. It was about waking up. It was about the terrifying and liberating act of choosing to see the world as it truly is, rather than as you have been told it is. And Neo's journey from a confused and ordinary man to someone who understood his own power resonated with millions of people who were sitting in their own comfortable illusions, wondering if there was something more waiting for them on the other side of their fear. Keanu Reeves became one of the most recognized faces on the planet, almost overnight, and the money and the fame arrived in quantities that most human beings cannot even imagine. And here is where the story takes a turn that is deeply important for you to understand. Because many people who reach that kind of peak become consumed by it. They start protecting the success. They start making safe choices. They start performing a version of themselves that the world expects rather than continuing to be the complicated and searching and genuinely human person they actually are. But Keanu did something different. He stayed humble. He stayed curious. He stayed kind, and the world noticed. And here is the question that this moment in his story puts directly in front of you. Because success is not just a test of your hunger, it is a test of your character. And the question is not only whether you can climb to the top, but whether you can remain yourself when you get there. Because the world will offer you 1,000 reasons to become arrogant when things go well. 1,000 invitations to forget where you came from and who helped you and what you actually believe in. And Keanu Reeves, at the absolute peak of his fame, chose humility over arrogance and generosity over greed. And that choice is the one that made his story worth telling long after the box office numbers were forgotten. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a storm, and it is not the peaceful silence of a calm evening or the comfortable silence of a rested mind. It is the heavy and disorienting silence of a person who has been through so much that the noise of the world no longer reaches them in the same way. A silence that comes from grief so deep and loss so total that ordinary life starts to feel like it belongs to a different species of person entirely. And after the deaths of his daughter and Jennifer, after the years of carrying wounds that fame and money cannot touch, Keanu Reeves entered that silence. And the world that had been watching him so closely suddenly found that he had stepped back from the spotlight and into something much quieter and much more private. He did not make a dramatic announcement, and he did not give a long interview explaining his state of mind. He simply began to move differently through the world. He took fewer roles. He spent more time alone. He was seen riding his motorcycle through the streets of Los Angeles like a man who needed the wind and the movement to remind himself that he was still alive and still present in his own body. And people who saw him during those years described a man who was gentle and courteous and completely without the performance that most famous people wrap around themselves like armor. As if the grief had stripped away every layer of pretense and left only the raw and honest human being underneath. Hollywood noticed the withdrawal, and Hollywood did what Hollywood always does. It began to whisper, and the whisper said that Keanu was finished, that his moment had passed, that the particular combination of circumstances that had made him a global star could not be recreated. And there is a specific cruelty in the way the entertainment industry treats people who step back to heal, because it has no patience for the rhythms of genuine human recovery. It moves at the speed of profit and attention, and it does not wait for anyone. And a person who needs time is very quickly replaced by a person who does not. And the message that sends to someone who is already struggling is as cold and as clear as anything can be. But here is what Keanu understood during those quiet years that the whispering voices did not understand, which is that healing is not weakness, and withdrawal is not defeat. Because sometimes the bravest thing a human being can do is to stop, to be still, to sit with the pain instead of running from it, to let the grief do its necessary work inside you instead of burying it under activity and distraction and the noise of a life lived at full speed. Because grief that is buried does not disappear. It waits, and it grows heavier in the dark. And the only way to truly move forward is to first allow yourself to fully feel the weight of what you have lost. And this is something you need to hear right now. If you are someone who has been told that your pain is taking too long, that you should be over it by now, that the world is moving on and you need to move with it. Because Keanu Reeves sat in his silence for as long as he needed to, and he did not apologize for it. And he did not let the impatience of others rush him through a process that cannot be rushed. And when he was ready, when the ground inside him was solid enough to build on again, he came back. And the comeback was not desperate or hurried or shaped by the need to prove something to the people who had written him off. It was calm, and it was real, and it was completely on his own terms. There is something that the world does not tell you about patience. Something that the motivational posters and the quick success stories carefully leave out, which is that real patience is not passive, and it is not comfortable, and it is not the simple act of sitting quietly and waiting for good things to arrive. Real patience is active, and it is painful, and it requires you to keep preparing and keep believing and keep working in the dark when there is no applause and no validation and no external sign that anything you are doing is making any difference at all. And Keanu Reeves, during his quiet years, was practicing exactly that kind of patience, building himself back up from the inside in a way that nobody could see, but that would eventually become impossible to ignore. And then in 2014, something happened that nobody in Hollywood had predicted. Because a relatively small action film was released with a modest budget and no enormous marketing campaign. And at the center of it was a character named John Wick, a retired assassin who comes back to life when the world takes the last thing he loves away from him. And audiences around the world felt something electric when they watched it, because there was a quality in Keanu's performance that went beyond technical skill. There was a real and palpable grief in the way he moved and fought and existed on screen. A grief that was not manufactured for the camera, but that came from somewhere genuine and deep inside the man himself. An art that comes from that place hits differently than art that is simply performed. John Wick became a phenomenon, and then a franchise, and then a cultural institution. And suddenly, the voices that had whispered that Keanu was finished were completely silent, replaced by a new conversation about resilience and reinvention, and the particular power of a person who has been through the fire and come out the other side not destroyed but refined. And the world looked at this man who was now in his late 40s and early 50s and saw something that young success rarely produces. They saw depth, they saw authenticity, they saw a human being who had paid a real price for the life he was living and who carried that price with dignity rather than bitterness. What the John Wick comeback teaches you is something fundamental about the relationship between suffering and strength. Because Keanu did not succeed in spite of everything he had been through. He succeeded because of it. Because the losses and the grief and the quiet years had carved something out of him that could not have been carved any other way. They had removed everything that was surface and superficial and left only what was essential and true. And when that kind of person stands in front of a camera or walks into a room or speaks to another human being, something comes through that cannot be faked and cannot be taught and cannot be shortcut. It can only be lived. So think about the waiting period you are in right now. Think about the season of your life that feels unproductive and invisible and far from everything you dreamed of. And instead of seeing it as wasted time, instead of measuring it against where you think you should be by now, try to understand it as the season of construction, the season where the foundation is being laid deep in the ground where nobody can see it. Because Keanu Reeves spent years in that invisible season, and the world called it decline, and he called it preparation. And when the moment came, he was ready in a way that only those years of quiet and grief and stubborn continuation could have made him. And your moment is coming too. But only if you use the waiting time the way he did. There is a version of success that the world celebrates loudly and constantly. And it is the version measured in numbers, in awards, in the size of a bank account, in the square footage of a house, and the number of people who recognize your face on the street. And there is nothing wrong with those things, but they are the surface of success. They are the visible part of an iceberg that goes much deeper, and what lives beneath the surface. What actually determines the weight and the meaning of a person's life is the kind of human being they choose to be when the cameras are off and the contracts are signed, and nobody is watching, and there is no professional reason to be kind or generous or humble. And by that deeper measure, Keanu Reeves is one of the most remarkable people walking on this earth today. The stories about his generosity are not rumors, and they are not public relations strategies designed to make him look good. They are accounts from real people who worked with him and around him, and who had no reason to invent what they saw. Because Keanu Reeves has given away tens of millions of dollars from his earnings on the Matrix films alone, directing enormous sums to the costume designers and the special effects teams and the crew, members who built the world of those films, but whose names nobody remembers and whose faces nobody recognizes. And he did this not because someone asked him to, and not because he was looking for praise. He did it because he understood that success is never truly individual. and that the people who helped you build something deserve to share in what that something produces. On film sets, he is known as the actor who remembers every crew member's name, who brings food for the entire team, who treats the person operating the camera with the same respect and attention he gives to the director. And in an industry that runs on hierarchy and ego and the performance of importance, this behavior is so unusual that people who encounter it for the first time do not quite know what to do with it, because they have been trained to expect something different from someone at his level of fame. And what he gives them instead is simple and direct human recognition. The acknowledgement that every person on that set matters, and that their contribution is seen and valued. And that kind of leadership changes the atmosphere of an entire production. He has spoken openly about the losses he has carried, about his daughter Ava, about Jennifer, about River Phoenix, not in the way that someone performs grief for an audience, but in the way that a person speaks, when they have truly integrated their pain into their understanding of life, when the wound has become wisdom rather than bitterness. And he has said that those experiences taught him to hold the people he loves more carefully, and to never assume that time is unlimited, and to never let a moment of genuine human connection pass by without honoring it, because he knows better than most people that those moments are not guaranteed, and that their loss leaves a silence that nothing else can fill. And here is what the life of Keanu Reeves ultimately teaches you about the kind of person you are choosing to become. Because success without character is just noise, and fame without kindness is just loneliness, dressed in expensive clothes. And the question his life puts in front of you is not whether you can achieve great things, because you can, but whether the person achieving those great things will be someone worth becoming, someone who lifts others as they rise, someone who remembers where they came from and who helped them get where they are going, someone who treats every human being they encounter as worthy of real attention and real respect. And that choice, the choice of who you are becoming, is the most important work you will ever do. You have been sitting with this story for a long time now. And if you have been truly listening, not just with your ears, but with that deeper part of you that knows the truth when it hears it, then something inside you has shifted. Because the story of Keanu Reeves is not really about an actor, and it is not really about Hollywood, and it is not really about martial arts, or blockbuster films, or the opinions of an industry that did not believe in him. It is about a human being who was handed every reason to give up, and who looked at every single one of those reasons and said no. And that no, that quiet and stubborn and unshakable no, is the most powerful word in the history of any person who ever built something real from the ruins of what life left them. Think about what he lost. A father who walked away before the boy could even understand what a father was supposed to be. A best friend, taken suddenly and without warning. A daughter who never took her first breath in this world. A woman he loved who left in the cruelest and most abrupt way. That life knows how to take someone, and then think about what he chose to do with all of that. Not as a performance, and not as a strategy, but as a daily and deeply personal decision to remain open. To remain generous, to remain curious about life, even after life had shown him its most devastating face, because that is not a small thing. That is one of the greatest acts of courage a human being can perform. And now the story turns completely toward you, because everything you have heard today was preparation for this moment. This moment where you stop being a listener and start being a participant, where the distance between Keanu's life and your life collapses completely, and you are left with nothing but the truth of your own situation, and the question of what you are going to do with it. Because you have been given something today that is more valuable than information. You have been given a mirror, and the mirror is showing you not just who you are, but who you are capable of becoming if you stop negotiating with your own potential and start demanding more from yourself. What is the loss you are using as an excuse right now? What is the rejection or the failure or the disappointment that you have placed between yourself and the life you know you are supposed to be living? Because Keanu Reeves buried his daughter and went back to work. He lost his closest friend and kept moving. He was written off by an entire industry and came back stronger and deeper and more himself than he had ever been before. And he did all of this not because he was superhuman, but because he made a decision that is available to every single person listening to these words right now. The decision that the pain is not the end of the story, that the silence is not the final chapter, that the waiting and the grief and the invisible years are not evidence of failure, but ingredients of something that is still being built. The clock is moving right now. It did not pause while you were listening, and it will not pause while you are deciding. Every second that passes is a second that belonged to your potential, and either you claimed it or you did not. And Keanu Reeves claimed his seconds, even when claiming them was the hardest thing imaginable. So the only question left, the one that will follow you when you close this and go back to your day, is whether you are ready to claim yours. Because the world is not waiting for a perfect version of you. It is waiting for the real version. The one that has been through something and kept going. The one that carries the weight and moves anyway. The one that rises not because everything is fine, but because rising is the only answer that means anything at all.